Hello and welcome to today's live event. Today on this live, I'm going to be talking about writing first, fixing later, story style, and staying on track. So, does one of these three scenarios sound like you? Okay, if you relate to this is going to definitely be a live you're going to want to stick around for. Are you constantly tempted to start drawing or illustrating your story before the words are even finished, before the manuscript's done? Today, in this live event, I'm going to talk to you about how to stay focused on the writing first and why it's the best, strongest move for picture book creation. But I'm going to also share with you how my own practice, my own neurodivergent brain likes to create simultaneously and how I balance that. So that's going to definitely be an interesting part of today's live. Does this scenario sound like you? Are you worried that your story, your writing and vocabulary in particular, are too advanced or maybe even too simple for the age group 4 to 8 years old? So, if you're worried about your vocabulary hitting the sweet spot for your target audience, you're going to really want to stick around for today's live because I'm going to be really addressing how to revise your word choice and land in that sweet spot, not only for read aloud books, but also for perhaps early readers if that's something that you're interested in writing, and what is the difference between read aloud and early readers and the comprehension of children in different age groups. So we're going to talk about that, and it's something I've never talked about here on the channel yet, even though I have my playlist called Writing Picture Books, which is a free class that I have here on the channel. You'll definitely want to check it out if you haven't already, where I take you step by step through the whole writing picture books process. And over there in lesson one, I talk about target age and word count, and specifically break down different age groups and what style picture book pertains to that age group. But here in today's live, I'm going to be talking about something totally different, which is the reading and comprehension level. It's even different than what I shared in a recent video where I shared 6 things that kids' brains understand about picture books. And so this is totally new today. And then the third scenario, does this sound like you? Is do you feel stuck in the loop of editing the first few pages or the beginning part of your story, but you never really make it to the end of your story because you're kind of editing before you even write that messy first draft? If that sounds like you, if you're like stuck in that editing loop and you can't stop editing, but you want to continue writing, then today you're going to want to hang in there towards the end of this live event because I'm going to share with you tips on how to pause the polish and just keep writing. Get out that messy first draft. So, yes, today we're talking about writing first, fixing later, story style, and staying on track. And my content today was really inspired by a couple of questions that I had following the previous live event where I gave different tips on writing picture books. And so after that live event, I got some further questions in the comments, and they were really good questions. And I thought I would use them to prompt today's live. Meanwhile, if you have any questions here during the live event that you want to pop into the chat, I will check the chat at the end of the event and respond to any questions that are there. If I miss your comment or question there, I will address it in a later event because that's what happened last time. I missed a really good question, and so I'm going to answer it today. So, welcome to the event here, and today I'm going to be sharing writing first, fixing later, story style, and staying on track. And I'm going to answer 3 really important questions. So, the first question that came to me after the last live event is from a viewer named Susan. If you're out there watching today, hi, Susan. And I wanted to just address your really great question. How can I focus on my story first and then tackle the illustrations? I tend to do both at the same time, and I think it slows me down. So, That is a question, is a very valid question, and it particularly pertains to those of us who are what I call a hybrid creator, where we write and illustrate our storybooks. So there's going to be some of you watching who are writers. You want to pursue the art of writing picture books, and you will be looking to collaborate with another illustrator that is not you. And that is also like an entire art form that you may want to just like listen to the answer of this question, because it will help you to know how to best collaborate with an illustrator. There's going to be some of you watching who are illustrators and you're just really curious about this video, this part of the process. But the answer to this question is really speaking to those of us who are hybrids, the ones of us who will write and illustrate our picture books, even if you're just learning how. Okay, so the question is, how can I focus on my story first and then tackle the illustrations? I tend to do both at the same time, and I think it slows me down. I'll first speak to the getting slowed down part. I like to say that picture book creation really is a marathon, not a sprint. You're going to hear me say that a couple times today. There are lots, though, that even slow down the marathon, so to speak. Lots of obstacles. And so we don't want those obstacles in our way. We definitely want to find ourselves a smooth process that helps us get our wonderful stories out into the world. And so I want to help that go smooth, but I also want to acknowledge that it isn't a race and we don't have to panic to get things done really fast. Sometimes we have to experiment with different processes to see what actually works for us personally. But first, I want to share with you some well-known advice as the first answer to this question. The answer to this question is going to be twofold, because I'm going to share with you the well-known advice that we are encouraged to practice. And I'm going to share with you what my practice actually looks like, because at times I need to separate from the well known advice just a little to make it work for my life personally. So, the well known advice is that most professional authors and editors will recommend completing your strong manuscript before moving into any form of illustration. So even in the traditional publishing world, if you were to send your manuscript to a traditional publisher, they would have your manuscript entirely finished before they ever looked for an illustrator to match your work, your story. And that is the well known advice, that you would have a manuscript first approach to your writing, where you write, edit, polish that manuscript, and then turn to create the visual design of your picture book. I like to hold myself accountable to understanding that approach and practicing that to whatever degree that I can. But I have found, now this is where the caveat comes for me personally, is that I have found that since I am a hybrid where I fully intend to write and illustrate my own picture books, I often need the visual inspiration to help me complete the task of writing. And so I've mentioned in past videos how I often create myself what I call a pilot painting that just sets the visual tone of and gives myself what I call a North Star to help me complete more menial tasks and keep me on track. But sometimes I will get so inspired by the visuals that I will kind of end up illustrating much more of the book or the story than is what is recommended in well-known advice. So I'm going to give you a couple personal examples. I worked on a manuscript all of last year that is a rhyming picture book. You would have heard me talk about it in a storyboarding video that I created here on the channel, which that video is doing really well. And it seems to be one of the most popular videos. But in that video, I talked about a rhyming storybook about a bear. I took a manuscript first approach to that story, and I polished that story, and I had a professional editor work on it with me. And it is a beautiful manuscript that I'm very proud of. Now I have turned my attention to illustrating that picture book, and I seem to have lost a little bit of visual enthusiasm. And what it has resulted in is I've overworked visually. I've overworked the character a little bit, and I'm not very inspired to get the job done in the illustration department, so to speak. And so I found that I just taking that manuscript first approach for my own brain just kind of took a little bit of the inspo away from the illustrations for me. And I don't know why. I can't share a reason behind that. It's just maybe how I tick as a creative person. Now I'm going to share with you a entirely different example. Recently, and I want to pull this up on my iPad just to see if I can show you the visual. But recently, I had a story come to me. I outlined the story and I made a messy first draft. And just as a side note, a messy first draft is something that my resource picture book template story builder. You can find this resource in all of my links. This helps you to get your messy first draft out by building your story through a template. Basically, this is a fill in the blank and it extracts your story right out of you into the messy first draft form. And so I use it personally. I print these. You once you download it from me, you can print it and just keep using it to build your stories. So I got this story, the second example that I'm sharing with you right now. I got this story into messy first draft and without getting a polished manuscript done, I opened up my iPad in Procreate and I started to illustrate the characters. And I had so much fun. So it just happens to be a weekend where everyone in the house was away and I was by myself and I just enjoyed myself illustrating these characters. When it comes to a to-do list, I should have technically been illustrating the other manuscript that I was previously telling you about, but somehow I was inspired to be working on this one. And I ended up illustrating way more of this picture book. I'm just going to slide through it here. Way more of this picture book than it's not letting me do what I wanted to do here. So here we go. I illustrated all of this in a very short amount of time. And normally, 4 illustrations would take me days, and this took me, one day. And I was so inspired, and yet I did not have a finished manuscript. Now, the 2 problems that you can run into with illustrating before you have a completed polished manuscript is that number one, you could end up wasting some time on illustrations and because once you go to polish that manuscript, you might change actions or the way the visuals should present themselves. And so you might end up doing some illustrations that won't be able to be seen in the final project. That is a risk you take by illustrating too soon before your manuscript is completed. And the other problem that you run into almost has to do with the other way around is that you may have to stop illustrating and go and write notes into your messy first draft to say, like, I showed this, did this, and you may be needing to simultaneously write, which can be a messy, disorganized process. So, the risk that you take by simultaneously illustrating and writing without having that polished manuscript done before the illustrations is that it could be disorganized and that could slow you down, which brings me back to the question that I'm answering, Susan's question, that I tend to do both at the same time, and I think it slows me down. Now, you're right, it might slow you down, but I have learned that if I have the right clarity from the outline and the messy first draft of my story, the right clarity and the right momentum of inspiration, I can actually go faster simply because I'm so inspired to illustrate. And that is something that you'll have to discern for your own personal practice, the way your brain and creativity works. If it's something that you can balance, can you balance going back and forth a little, having a little bit of a messy playroom, so to speak, and what that will look like in terms of completing the project. So I've found that toggling back and forth, I've had way more inspiration with this particular story than I did with the one that I have a polished manuscript. And yet I'm determined I will finish them both, but they're just both going through a slightly different approach. So, yes, the well known advice is manuscript first. Polish that manuscript before you start the illustrations. But if you are a person who has a wave of inspiration and you can manage and juggle both, then I encourage you to explore a little and see how your process, how it works best for you, and develop a personalized process that's for you. Okay, so does it sound like that you might be worried about your vocabulary and your choice of words landing in the sweet spot for the age range that you want to target? So, this is in answer to a second question that I had after the last live event. After the last live event, I had a question that it was actually three questions in one. I'm just going to read it all out to you. And thank you. Sarah is who commented and asked the question. Thank you for this question. It's given me lots to think about and a lot to answer here. So, you asked, and I'll read it all out and then I'm going to break it down in an answer for you. You've said here, I've outlined my plot and I'm working on my first messy draft. My age range is 4 to 8, but I don't think my word choices match my age range. And I'm feeling frustration about it and it's slowing down my process. Do I just keep writing my complete story and go back to adjust words later, or should I fix it as I'm writing now? I've also heard show don't tell. I'm trying to keep that in mind. I'm also trying to stay away from using passive voice. Is a passive voice allowed in dialogue? So, first, I want to say those last two questions that you asked there, I'm going to break them off entirely from today's live and answer them in another video. So, I've decided I'll do another video about the use of active and passive voice in picture books and about the term show don't tell and what that means in picture books. So today here I'm going to just address your very first two questions that your age range that you're targeting is for ages 4 to 8, but you don't think your word choice matches the age range. And then I'll speak later to whether you should adjust things now or keep writing and then fix it later. So, in terms of your age range, so this is a very big, broad topic, and you've actually chosen a very broad age range by saying your age range that you're targeting is from ages 4 to 8. I do have some other helper videos on the channel. One is in the writing picture books class, the free class here on YouTube in a playlist that in lesson 1, I speak to target age and word count. And then I also have a video that is about the 6 things that for kids' brains. So basically, I'm looking here. If I wrote down the title of that video, I'll find it in a moment. But basically, I speak to the 6 things you should know about kids' brains when writing picture books, and that those will help you those videos will help you about age range. But today I'm going to speak to you about something totally different than what I've spoken in the other playlists or in the other videos. We're going to talk about comprehension from a slightly different angle on whether you're writing a read aloud book or an early reader book, because there is a difference with what you can get away with in terms of vocabulary and word choice. So, what I mean by that, okay, and let's start with some well known advice. For ages 4 to 5, it's best to keep sentences short and vocabulary simple. Okay. We're talking preschool and kindergarten age. They need very simple vocabulary. But for ages 6 to 8, when they're starting to read a little bit more, you can introduce more complex words and ideas. Okay. So picture books should really match developmental stages for the best engagement and the best comprehension for the little ones. But if you think about it, there's There's sort of an unspoken fact that most picture books are read alouds by a teacher or adult. Okay, so if you think about how picture books typically work, is the child like climbs up on the caregiver's lap, and the caregiver reads and points to pictures, might point to words, might encourage the child to read a word or two, but typically these are read alouds by an adult or by a reader. And then there are other books that we call early readers, where the author creates a book that is meant and designed to be read by children in a specific age group. And so typically, you're going to be like, for the general picture book creator, we're making books that are read aloud. We intend for an adult or caregiver or reader to read aloud to the child. And what this allows us to do is to use a readability level that is a little bit higher than that child's readability ability. And so we're able to, what we're looking to do is to meet their comprehension. And most children can comprehend levels that are a little bit higher than their reading level. So I want to let you know here as a disclaimer, I am not a teacher. I don't have an educated background in language development or in childhood development. But as an author and an illustrator, I've studied this and I'm sharing to you different learning points that I've landed on that have helped my craft. Okay. So, what I find is that even if my language in which I'm writing is a little bit higher in readability level, we can often still use it because the book is read aloud and the child can comprehend more than their reading level, with a caution. So I say that with a caution that I wouldn't introduce really big words that they wouldn't have learned in their vocabulary, unless there is a little exception to that. Unless you introduce a word that you want them to learn. And there is a special word for that, and I forget what it is, and I'll do a video about it, but there is a special word. I did a bunch of research on it. And there's an angle that we can take where we introduce a specific word, like the word compassion. I'll use it as an example. It's a really big word and it might not be in the vocabulary of most little ones, but perhaps you want them to learn that word through your book. And then you introduce that book, or excuse me, that word in a way that they'll begin to learn and grasp. So, I have found an online tool that really helps me to determine the readability level of my text and whether or not I want to simplify my word choice, or it helps me determine if I'm comfortable leaving my word choice the way it is. And I'm going to, in the description box, I'm going to put what to search in Google. I'm not going to give you a specific link because I found that there was a couple of sites that gave this kind of word calculator. But it is a tool called Flesch-Kincaid Reading Level Calculator. And I'll put the spelling, because Flesch-Kincaid is a really interesting spelling. I'll put that in the description. You can Google it. And what I recently did, so I'll share with you my personal experience recently with the Flesch-Kincaid calculator. Actually, it was to do with this story that I was telling you that I got so inspired with this story that I kind of ran away illustrating before the manuscript is done. And this I took all the text from this, what I'm going to call a messy first draft, and I just wanted to see what age group it was actually targeting. Okay. And what my findings on the Flesh Kincaid calculator were very interesting. It told me, now don't be alarmed by this, because I'll explain it again in a moment. But it told me that this writing was actually reaching and landing on a sixth grade level. And I was like, what? Wait a second. Because I'm targeting a much younger audience. But it also gave me a score on the Flesch-Kincaid calculator, and the score was that it was very easy to read and that it was very easy to understand. So then when I began to dissect the different scoring levels and why did it say my writing was on a 6th grade level, but why did it say it was also easy to understand that it could be written for the 3rd grade? I realized that it has a sort of different scoring for comprehension, whether it's going to be read aloud, and the readability. So, what it was essentially saying to me is that a student in 6th grade could read it by themselves, but that if it's read aloud, it lands at a much lower age target because their comprehension will easily understand this book. And so it helped me to determine that I did feel that I was landing in the sweet spot with the way that I was writing this picture book. And it also showed me that I wanted to simplify some words. And so I was able to simplify. I looked for alternative words that might be easier to comprehend for that age group. So, hopefully, in the answer to this question about you looking to target ages 4 to 8, but finding your word choice doesn't quite match the age range, hopefully, me sharing the tool of how you can search up a readability calculator, look at where it's landing, ask yourself the question, am I looking to make a read aloud or an easy reader? And then knowing whether your words are able to be comprehended, and then if you want them to be read by the child or just able to be comprehended. And these are questions to ask yourself. And then I also, just in closing to that question, want to say that the age range 4 to 8 is pretty broad. So if you're able to target in a little bit more and hone in on maybe ages 4 to 6, or then maybe ages 6 to 8, you will find it a bit easier to choose your words and vocabulary. So, hopefully, that helped answer that part of your question. Now, there's this ending part of your question that you said, do I keep writing or fix it later? Do I keep writing and fix it later, or do I edit it now? So, there is well known advice that most writing coaches are going to recommend that you push through and edit that first draft before any heavy editing. Okay. And I find time and time again, we're tempted as writers to just like edit, edit, edit. We want those first few paragraphs and pages to just sound perfect. And we want to, we get stuck in an area of our manuscript where we just want to edit. But it is a smoother practice to move through the manuscript entirely altogether, focusing on certain aspects of the editing. So I do touch on this over in the playlist, Writing Picture Books, the free class that I have here on YouTube. I touch on this in the one of the last videos in the playlist where I talk on revising and editing and what those are, the differences. And when you revise a manuscript, I will often go through with certain lenses. Okay. I'll go through, for example, with the lens of word choice. And I will be reading it and editing it, thinking only or trying to keep myself to think only about, did I choose the right word? Is this the right vocabulary? Then I will go through it again in one swoop where I'm only thinking about perhaps that aspect which I haven't touched on today called show, don't tell. What are my illustrations going to show versus what does my text need to tell? So I want to give a really basic example of this that just happened in this story. So in my messy first draft, and of course, we know that in a messy first draft, you just kind of let it all out. In my messy first draft, my character scratches his head and he's asking grandma a question and it says he scratched his head. And I realized as I was illustrating, because I was, if you heard the beginning part of the live event where I shared how I have been toggling with this story against the well known advice of manuscript first. I noticed that I could illustrate my little character scratching his head, and here he is scratching his head. I could illustrate him doing that rather than having the text say it. And I noticed, okay, it's better and stronger for my story if my text does not say that. So I will go through with the different lenses of revising my manuscript where I look for parts to specifically remove and make notes. If you're working with another illustrator, if you're not the illustrator of your picture book, you would at that time be making notes for your illustrator, and you would basically as a rule of thumb, coming back to the question and the answer here, is that you would look to write and fully write your manuscript, first messy draft. Begin to revise with certain lenses all the way through the best you can, fixing major story issues as you go. Like, for another example, sometimes I'll go all the way through that draft looking specifically at plot and structure. Am I happy with the plot? Is the conflict the worst it can be? Is the resolve the best it can be? And I'll look through all in one swoop, looking so that we are slowly building up the entire manuscript, not dialing in on one or two paragraphs that are overworked, and then the rest is a little bit neglected. That is the risk of focusing in on like one aspect where you get stuck editing a certain spot. And so I encourage you to look at the whole piece and just keep going through it like you're brushing it out with a fine tooth comb, little by little. And that's the best rule of thumb. As I mentioned before, there was another aspect of that question that had to do with the passive versus active voice. I'm going to do a whole other video on the passive and active voice. I won't talk about that here today in this live stream. If anyone here with us today has any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments here in the next 2 minutes, because I'm going to start wrapping it up. But if there's any questions that really pertain to what I've talked about today, in terms of how we've called today writing first, fixing later, story style, and staying on track. So if you have any questions about that, I in the beginning of the live, I talked about being a hybrid writer and illustrator, how to focus, what happens if you kind of toggle back and forth, the manuscript first approach. And then I talked about age range and choosing your vocabulary, and recommended the online tool of readability calculators. And then we've touched here on just revising and editing. If you have questions about that, feel free to just like pop it into the comments here. I can answer. And then later, when this is a replay, feel free on the replay to ask some questions. What I've been doing here on the Picture Book Creators channel is really just using the questions and comments of the subscribers here to carry forward content that I feel will be helpful and relevant to you. And as well, you might be already aware that I've been creating printable resources for picture book creators. So they're typically you'll find in my links there resources that will help you get your writing done. So I have a picture book writing story builder where you fill in the blanks and write your whole story. And I have a picture book writing exercises that help you to exercise all the skills you need to carry you through world building, which is your character development and your vivid setting development. It helps you to exercise developing good conflicts and resolve. So I have a speed exercise in this book where I give you a scenario that you have to come up with the resolve of the conflict. So it's it kind of like keeps your brain sharp and helps you to exercise the skills that you need in your storytelling. And so I've found that both of these resources that you'll find in my link, they both sell neck and neck. They're both highly and really well reviewed and helpful. So this picture book template story builder, I use it because you can print out, once you get this from me, you can print out as many as you want, and just keep writing your stories. There's a storyboard helper in the back, as well as some rules of thumb that I put in here to help you to pace and paginate your story. So all of those are in the links, but that's kind of what I'm doing around here in Picture Book Creators is I'm developing resources to help you get your stories out into the world. From your questions and comments here on the channel, I'm creating videos that will hopefully help you to encourage you to get your stories written and illustrated and published. So there are no further comments in the chat. So I'll wrap up today's live event. Thanking you all so much for being here. I hope that you found everything that we've shared here today helpful, with some good thought behind it on how you're going to approach your writing before illustrating, your matching word choice to age range, and your editing while writing. Is that a yes or no for you? And how will you best practice? So, hopefully, you found this helpful, encouraging, and informative. Be sure to leave a comment, hit the like. This will be a replay on the channel. And until next time, picture book creators, happy writing. Thanks for being here.